Hey everybody, welcome back to Food Literacy for All, or welcome to Food Literacy for All if this is your first time here. We're so glad to virtually be together. Tonight we have Raj Patel with us as a guest, and we're going to be doing a Q&A discussion about the film that we screened last week, or that maybe you watched on your own, called The Ants and the Grasshopper. So a couple of quick announcements about the class before we get going. Okay, so this class is made possible by so many different groups on campus. I want to give a specific shout out to CEW for really sponsoring this class in a big way this semester, as well as many other groups. And there's also a lot of people involved in this class. I co-lead the class with Dr. Jessica Kenyatta Walker and Shakara Tyler. It's an honor to be working with such a fantastic team. And there's so many other people that make this class happen too. Specifically, Megan and Ayetzi, who are the GSIs for the class. And you all, I think, Megan, you're welcome to make a quick announcement. I know you've been getting a lot of questions. I also want to give a shout out to Kimmy and Chris.
Thanks. Hey, everybody. I just want to make a quick announcement to clarify about some communications. If you don't know me already, I'm one of your GSIs with NYEXI. And any questions that you guys have about the class, about quizzes, about Canvas, about communications, you can field them our way directly. They'll come to us eventually anyway. And this saves some time for our awesome instructors. And we are the administrative people behind everything going on that will deal with your questions. Another thing I wanted to share with you guys that we'll be sharing with you in an email tomorrow is that now that you guys are in groups 1 through 24 will be assigned to me, and groups 25 through 41 will be assigned to NYEXI. You can field your emails to each of us respectively, but you may attend any of our office hours, and you can find our office hours in the syllabus and sign up for an appointment via Calendly. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Megan. I got a couple more quick announcements. All right, so if you want to discuss with each other, there's lots of different ways to do that. Obviously, students can discuss on Canvas. Also, if you want to tweet using the hashtag Food Literacy for All, that's another way to engage with each other. I have heard from some community participants around the world who are interested in discussing some of the themes of the class with each other. Some of you have reached out to me, and I'm happy to help connect you all if you want to find a way to either get together virtually or in person. All of the classes are recorded on the SFSI website, so you can check. There's a link in the chat in a moment, and you can find a whole archive of classes. You can sort based on year or based on theme. It's a really cool archive. And of course, this class is free. It's open to the public. We're glad you're here. And lastly, if you want to submit questions for tonight's class, we're going to have this discussion with Raj. You can do so in the Q&A box. So students, we already have a lot of your questions. If you have more questions, you're welcome to drop them in. Community members, we of course welcome your questions as well. So thank you. And now I'm going to pass the mic to Shikara to introduce our speaker today.
Thanks, Lily. Peace, everyone. Glad everyone is able to make it. So great to see and hear your voices. I have the enormous pleasure of introducing my sincere comrade, Raj Patel. He's an award-winning author, filmmaker, and academic. He is currently a research professor in the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas, Austin. And just let me go off script for a quick minute and just say he is one of the most beautiful humans ever to grace the earth. Super prolific writing on food sovereignty and food justice, and just really grounded in grassroots movements. And we're so thankful for the work that he's been doing over the years to push for the transformation that the world needs. He has a slate of books that are award-winning and just highly rated across the board. I think I have every one of your books, Raj, and I would like for you to sign them at some point. His first book, Stuffed and Starved, The Hidden Battle for the World Food System, is an epic writing of the history of the food system that I think everyone should read. The Value of Nothing is a New York Times and international bestseller. He's also the co-author with Jason Moore of A History of the World and Seven Cheap Things. And his latest book is co-authored with Rupa Maria that is entitled Inflamed: Deep Medicine and the Anatomy of Injustice. So I didn't know that it was possible to write so many books, Raj, and I'm so excited to be in conversation with you, and the film is so awesome, and let's get the show on the roll.
Well, first of all, thanks so much, Shakira. It's just it's such an honor to be talking with you, comrade. It's just, and again, thank you for gracing the film and bringing your wisdom to it. It wouldn't happen without you. I believe I'm here to do a Q&A. So I'm ready to do the A bit if someone has a Q. I don't know whether if there's any I should be taking in particular, but since I see one here about the process for selecting locations in the US, maybe I should start with that and then answer any more that come in. So thank you, Abigail, for that question. Look, there's a long genesis to this film. Maybe I can start by just giving you the sort of the background, and I ended up being a talking head in other people's films in the in the 2000s, after Stuffed and Starved came out. I was in films that you may have seen that have a certain kind of rhythm to them, and the rhythm is this. First of all, you'll see the camera opens on some working class family, or sometimes people of color, and they're having a hard time, and the camera sort of moves around, and people are suffering, and they're not eating great food, and things are going pretty badly, and then their day gets underway, and things are just go downhill from there, and they're in dialysis, or they're working incredibly hard in brutal conditions, and it's just suffering and suffering, suffering. And then someone like me will come on and go, the food system is pretty bad, and the poor have it tough. And Monsanto is a very bad company, and this is a bad company, and that kind. And these are very naughty companies, and we oughtn't to be supporting them. And then all of a sudden, the cadence of the film will change, and you'll find white people in farmers markets, and they've got tote bags, and they're stuffing them with organic kale, and then they're blending it, and they're drinking it through metal straws, and they're driving away in their Teslas, and you're told, look, if only you buy organic food in the farmers market, and then and you drink through a metal straw, and you drive a car, or an electric car, or whatever it is, everything will be fine. Now, the problem with these kinds of films, it seemed to me at the time, was that the people of color and working class communities and frontline communities were reduced to absolute silence. They appear at the beginning, and by the end they're gone, and there's never any questioning about whether these frontline communities have any ideas about how things should change. And instead, it's left to sort of talking heads like me, and in the end, the solutions are so small to a problem that is obviously so big. So, it's not like I don't go to farmers markets, I eat kale, I have a metal straw, I have an electric car, but I don't think that these are solutions to anything. I think that they're just reminders that you need to be doing much more, and we need to be organizing. So the film initially was a project where I was essentially I was accompanied by a director called Steve James. Steve did a film called Hoop Dreams in the 1990s. I studied it as a PhD student. We studied it as an example of how committed filmmaking could work. And Steve was with me on the first sort of trips to Malawi, and he helped. He was the person who cast Anita, and we can talk about that later. But through the sort of long journey of this film, Steve had to drop out because, among other things, he wanted to be paid, and we had no money at all. So in the end, I ended up working with one of his proteges, Zak Piper, and we ended up sort of completing the film together. And initially, this was going to be a film just about Malawi and about the amazing work that was happening with Soils, Food, and Healthy Communities. But Anita herself said, she found out about climate change, and she said, do you want us to come to America? And that changed the film. And she said, well, look, I want to talk to Americans because y'all don't seem to understand climate change. And I want to talk to the president. I want to talk to whoever does agriculture. I want to talk to whoever does foreign aid. I want to talk to the head of corporations. I want to talk to the Gates Foundation. I want to talk to all these people. And we as a film team, we're like, okay, fine, we'll go off and raise the money. In the end, we put it all on our credit cards for her to come over. And we sent, we banged down the doors of Pepsi. We went to Seattle with Anita to talk to the Gates Foundation. We went all over the place trying to find people to talk to us. And in the end, what happened was that none of them wanted to talk to us because they understood Anita's philosophy very well, that if you go to someone's doorstep with your problem, they cannot ignore you. So the folk we ended up spending time with were folk who were either friends of mine and comrades from way back, like Shakira and like Baba Malik Yakini, and with amazing comrades in Detroit, or folk in on the West Coast, or the Goodman family. Jim and Rebecca Goodman are friends from way back. They from working in La Villa Campesina, or friends of friends. So Trisha and Ed, for example, I didn't know them, but I knew people who were part of the Sustainable Iowa Land Trust where they worked. So it was either friends or friends of friends who we were connecting with all the way along, because the real people that Anita wanted to talk to were terrified of her, to be honest. And that's why the sort of selection of people that you have in the film was the way that it was, because again, people understood Anita's philosophy of if you go to someone's doorstep with your problem, they cannot ignore you.
Thank you for that answer. I think you touching on hoop dreams kind of resonates with a few questions that students had, and they're related to your own experiences and how you were able to present a film without judgment or sway. And students are asking about the process for that. How do you not insert yourself? What inspires you, and how since the film have you kind of learned to persuade folks, or what has changed about how you approach persuading people about the realities of climate crisis?
What a beautiful set of questions, Jessica. Thank you so much for those. This film was a journey, right? Because initially it was going to be, we'd be done in a year or two, and it would be a series of stories from around the world, and we'd be able to pay everyone, and it'd be wonderful. But what initially it was, a case of going to Malawi and presenting the story of gender transformation that was happening there. And that story of Winston's transformation took a little bit longer than we thought it would. It was we thought it was a transformation that would take a couple of years. In the end, it took about 4 or 5. But in the process of that transformation, not only did the sort of mode of the film changed, but the power dynamics changed as well. And it was a process of active decolonization, because initially it was a case of sort of going over there, and I was like, comrades, here we are, we're here to tell your story in a way that is not exploitative or extractive. But initially, in order to sell it to donors, it was going to be voiced over by Jake Gyllenhaal. And that's a bad idea for so many reasons. But then, I was going to do the voiceover in the film, and just in the edit suite, just to piece things together. And I was like a woke David Attenborough, where I was like, here we are among the Malawians, and if you listen very closely, you can hear them smash patriarchy. And no one wants that. And in the end, it became very clear that that the film needed to acknowledge that I was there, right? Because some of these choices were mine and Zak's, but it also became clear that as few of those choices as possible needed to be mine and Zak's. And so when Anita, essentially, we realized that this is Anita's film and Anita's story to tell. And so we ended up spending a lot of time figuring out processes where we could work with Anita to edit the film. And because Anita lives where there's no electricity, we couldn't train and work with her to edit the film directly. But what we figured out was a sort of next best thing, where we were showing cuts and showing ideas and showing sections of the film, seeing whether she liked them or not, and then workshopping with her what the voiceover would be. So, we would show a long segment. And this was all being done in English and Tumbuka, and the translation process was one where essentially we were throwing ideas back and forth until she found one that she liked. And then she was like, okay, great, we'll lock that. And we recorded it. And then we moved on to the next segment. And there was lots of stuff in this film that ended up on the cutting room floor. Actually, you know what? We've got a poll about that. I wonder if we could just throw up the poll about the missing scenes. Because I'm super curious about what, thank you. So here's some of the scenes that we didn't put in the film, but I'm curious about whether you would like to have seen these. So we cut a number of them. So Esther and Anita were visiting a food bank. This was at Riverside Church in New York City. And then we were at a super fancy restaurant. We were at an incredible school of the Muckleshoot Nation in Enumclaw in Washington State. We were also at the Edible Schoolyard Project in Berkeley, and we were in Detroit, where Esther and Anita were recording a radio show. And all of these were scenes that we recorded, but Anita didn't care for one way or another. But I'm sort of curious about what y'all think you would have liked to have seen. So I wonder if we can just very quickly just gauge your interest. Which of those? So food bank, fancy restaurant, Native American school, farm to table schoolyard project, or radio show in Detroit. And don't let the Detroit bit sway you, because though it was kind of awesome, which of these would you have preferred to have seen? Food bank, restaurant, school, farm to table, or radio show? Yes, I thought so too. So yeah, the number one option here was the Native American school. It was super interesting that there is one section of that remains in the film, and it's the bit where Anita is holding the clam, and you hear someone say, "That's a whole bowl of clam chowder right there." That was actually filmed in Washington State, and the woman who's saying "that's a whole bowl of clam chowder" is Valerie Segrest, who is part of the Muckleshoot Nation. It was an amazing school, and one that I very much, we're working to be able to create a short version of it that will be available online. But basically what happened there was Val was teaching First Nation kids about how it is that they're being poisoned by Coke and Pepsi, and how there are way better alternatives, Native Americans alternative beverages and ways of engaging in the food system. The problem was that Anita and Esther were sort of sitting there and they were learning things and they were sort of nodding along, but there wasn't a whole lot of engagement with them, except at the end where they were picking medicines from the medicine closet of Val Segrest. And Val was just so generous. She was giving away all these medicines. And there was a really important scene where Anita was taking a whole bunch of medicine for Christopher, because Christopher was malnourished when he was a kid. He suffers from night blindness, which is a permanent condition. If you're malnourished, your ability to see at night suffers because of vitamin A deficiency, but that can be a permanent condition. Val had some of these medicines that Christopher could use to improve his sight. And it ended up being a discussion about the domestic violence that Anita had suffered and the transformation that she had wrought on Christopher. But when we showed that scene, she didn't like it. And she wasn't thrilled by it, and she preferred not to have it in the film. So that's why it's not there. But a short version of some of that will be available online. And all of this is to get back to your question, Jessica, of how to persuade people. Well, the persuasion answer here was I took a step back and realized that while I could make a communist film about the food system, that's not what Anita wanted. And what Anita wanted was something else with a different kind of cadence, a different kind of language. And she speaks the language of Christian prophets. It's not something I know anything about. And that means that she wants to talk to a whole bunch of different people that I want to talk to, and wants to persuade them using the Bible as her weapon of choice. If she wants to use the Bible if she wants to use the book of Genesis to talk about gender equality, I've never seen the book of Genesis used that way, but she did it. And that's her one of her many superpowers. So in a sense, this is a long answer, but it's an answer about decolonization and decolonizing ourselves in the process of making this film, so that the ultimate result was one that acknowledged our footprints, our colonial footprints, in front of the camera and behind it. but one that also seeks reparation and seeks a modicum of rebalancing and justice, both by by essentially centering Anita's voice, but then also by doing things like stepping back and actually funding a series of endeavors in Detroit, which hopefully through the Detroit Narrative Agency and some of the organizing that Malik has done, will result in a film that will be shown later on this year, I hope, in Detroit, about the food system in Detroit, run and told by people in Detroit. So our decolonizing process is an ongoing one. And the ultimate part of that is for us to step the hell away and just let the money flow through filmmaking in Detroit, and also to work with Anita and Esther and Soil, Food and Healthy Communities to continue to make this film impactful in ways that they want. I hope that answers the question. So yeah, basically, my philosophy of change now is essentially to step back and to allow to really not take the mic, but instead to be of service to the people who need the mic in ways that I can.
Wow, that's so powerful, Raj. Thank you for addressing that. And I think you addressed multiple answers or multiple questions in your answer. So thank you. So there are a few questions about, of all the places in the country to visit, how and why did you all choose to visit Detroit and D-Town Farm? And were there any reactions or insights from Esther and Anita about just being in Detroit generally?
I think it comes out clearly in the film, but they loved Detroit. It was their favorite place in the entire trip. And, in part that's because the language that's, and the sort of the mode of operating on D-Town farms resonated most directly with what they're trying to do in Malawi, right? It's trying to create new ways of being so that folk can break out of the sort of traps and the cycles of industrial capitalist agriculture. And Baba Malik says it so beautifully, right? Where he says that we're planting seeds in people's minds as well as planting seeds in the soil. That's a beautiful way of describing the work that's happening in terms of fighting the patriarchy that that Winston is party to. But it's also fighting the monoculture of industrial agriculture that obtains in Malawi. By creating these rich polycultures in the field, they're doing the same thing. And so they were really interested in the water harvesting, for instance, on D-Town farms. And they were like, well, how do we do that? How do we get the solar power? How do we reforest? How do we make sure that we have the water sequestration in the ways that y'all do there? And that, all of a sudden that conversation felt like it was a conversation between peers, rather than a sort of series of, here's how we're doing it here, tell us what you're doing. Oh, that's very interesting. Yes, that doesn't directly relate to what we're doing, but maybe it does, or maybe it doesn't. And I think, the questions of race and of history matter. And I think all of that was important. Plus the fact that we got to hear, Baba Malik's band. And there was the music and joy and pleasure were a really important part of organizing. Really made a difference. In other places, and even in at the People's Kitchen Collective in Berkeley, there was a sense of joy sitting around the table and singing and exchanging with music. But I think that there was more of that in Detroit than anywhere else. And that idea of just music and joy and movement time. This is an idea that, we've all experienced movement time. It's different from NGO time. NGO time is, where nonprofits, sort of run things as a business and do things on the clock. Movement time is that elastic period of time where we take the streets and we look after each other's kids and we feed one another, and meetings go on into the night because they have to, but we have each other's backs because we're in this space of love and of care where money doesn't matter. Money, funds things, but right now this isn't a time for money. This is a time for love and for care and for organizing and for hustling. And that idea is something that feels much more familiar to the rhythms of organizing around soil, food, and healthy communities than some of the more kind of we're here 9 to 5 moments that sometimes we ran into. Does that make sense, Shakira? I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And in my experience, those are really the key spaces where the work is getting done. When we're cooking together, we're breaking bread together, we're just relaxing by the fire, sharing stories. Just when there's not a super structured agenda and we can live through our spirits and not through this like hierarchically imposed agenda of what social justice is supposed to be in these spaces, right? Like, yeah, it makes a big difference. And I remember the conversation that we had with Detroiters and Anita and Esther, and many folks here are still talking about that. And I think they really had, Anita and Esther really had an impact on them in terms of understanding what it really means to be in solidarity with not only Malawian farmers, but just people that are across the ocean that have very different ways of being than we do, and how addicted we are to our lifestyles and how we drastically need to change what we're doing and how we do it, right? And yeah, there's been some really powerful things happening just because of those conversations that were had at D-Town that day. And so we're really thankful.
And, you know, I mean, I think, you know, in our journey on food justice, you put your finger on it there, Shakira. What we're trying to do is sort of transmute money into care, and capitalism doesn't do that, right? But what we're trying to do is figure out ways to move into this world of care and of love. But capitalism has its own regiments of time and of money, and we're, you know, the idea that actually what we really need to be doing is developing these bonds, not just within our community, but internationally. That was really meaningful to them. And, you know, I think that was the other thing that, you know, that they're grateful for, and I'm deeply grateful for in our time together, you know, whether actually on D-Town Farm or actually in Maryland, was an openness to internationalism when it comes to thinking about the food system. Because one of the things about US social movements in general is an increasing parochialism, right? It's sort of, despite everything, much more sort of America first these days than it used to be. And in that moment, in, you know, when we've been together, and Shakira, you're the common denominator here, right? Well, in both places, what was really moving and what they connected with was the idea that there was a real openness to the idea that there is a world outside America. There's a world outside the United States that our politics here can and should engage with, and an openness to that often was very lacking, you know, whether in the Midwest or in other sort of stops along the way. But in, you know, on the farm, particularly with people of color, that openness sort of cracked the world open in a way that was very inviting.
Right. Yeah. And I want to, the last note here, I want to say how Detroit being a hotbed of like Black nationalism, which is an international process and phenomenon, and right, and Pan-Africanism, and just like solidarity throughout the African diaspora, like that spirit is what excited people to show up and engage in that discussion, because sometimes it's highly theoretical for us. We don't always get to engage with people like our kin that are that live on the continent and that are closer to the continent in ways that we're not. And so that unique experience of being able to hug them and talk to them and listen to their stories, just, it carried us so far in ways that nothing else could have. And so that African diasporic solidarity just through dialogue is so special. I'm going to I'll pass it to Jessica, because I know there's a huge slate of questions that we need to get to.
Yeah, it kind of flows into a question that we saw pop up and again. It was students kind of overwhelmed by the individual aspect of this. What do I do versus, or I guess in concert with the relational. So connecting what they sense are kind of big ideas and big changes to what we were just talking about, the importance of care and reciprocity and just our everyday interactions. So I wondered if one way to get at that was to explain what is up with the Ants and the Grasshopper. What's that name about? How does that connect to kind of a larger argument about the film? And another student also connected that to, I believe it was something Anita said, is that when elephants fight, the grass suffers. So again, getting that perspective between individual acts and individual scale versus what are seen as kind of large and unwieldy ideas. So how do you connect those, or how do you help people connect those?
Oh, fantastic! Again, thank you so much, Jessica, for that really engaging summary of what I imagine is a ton of really interesting question. The title, "The Ants and the Grasshopper," was one that we came to again after having tried a whole bunch of other things. And you know, one of my favorite titles of the film was suggested by my wife, who wanted to call it "Anita Does All These Things." You know, another title was "Men Saying Sorry," which there's an interesting sort of arc of apology and non-apology in the film, which was one of those themes. But The Ants and the Grasshopper made the most sense because it's a story that Anita came to organically and used to describe what she saw in America. And so we use The Ants and the Grasshopper, even though white folk often would interpret it as the title of an Aesop's fable. Some of you may know the story of, in Aesop's fable, the ants work very hard, whereas the grasshopper spends the summer fiddling. Then the grasshopper wants to come to the ants when it comes to winter and says, "Please, ants, feed me," and the ants tell the grasshopper to go away. But the story in Malawi is very different. It's a very sort of direct observation of metaphor, which we show in the film very briefly. You have to sort of look carefully for the shot, but it comes pretty much right at the end, where you see these ants carrying a grasshopper, this grasshopper's dead, and the individual ants have sort of each got a little bit of the grasshopper, and it's being shunted along. And the story there is precisely about how it is that, look, no one ant can lift a grasshopper, but together we can. And it's a way both of talking about individual action, because every ant needs to pitch in, but it's a need for collectivity and collective action. And I love how that Anita's observation messes with the things that we're told here in America, which is that if you're doing something, it has to be done individually. Because in America, we have this culture of individualism that honestly, Anita and Esther were kind of appalled by. And they were appalled by it not just when they were here, but also afterwards, even after we shot the final sort of voiceover. Zak and I were in Malawi in February 2020. And people tend to remember February and March 2020 because things gradually started to lock down pretty quickly. In fact, Zak and I were trapped in, both of us got what appeared to be COVID pretty much in that month because of our exposure to folk at airports. And then we came home and we're pretty ill, in my case, for a year afterwards. But that, COVID showed the individualist strain that Anita had put her finger on. So I want to talk about that for a second, because in America, particularly, and you see it in the film, particularly among, it just falls along lines of race often in the film. You'll find people who are part of the organic movement in the United States for reasons that seem benign, right? I want to be part of the organic movement because I don't like Monsanto. I want to be part of the organic movement because pesticides are bad. I get that. That's, those are legitimate ideas. But who is it that's exposed to pesticides most in the US or any other farm system? It's farm workers. In the US, those are people of color. If you're thinking about who's exposed to agricultural chemicals, it's the working people of color who feed America. And if you look at who is it that has jobs in the food system, 7 out of the 10 worst paying jobs in America are in the food system. And 40-something% of people in the food system earn less than $15 an hour. So exposure to the worst parts of the food system, not whether agricultural chemicals or anything else, is about people of color. And yet, the sort of purist approach to the food system doesn't give a shit about them, because actually there's another way of thinking about organic food, which is my body is a temple, and you shall not introduced contaminants into my body because this body is pure, and I want to maintain the purity of my precious bodily fluids. If you want to sort of riff off Dr. Strangelove, there's this observation that actually your bodily fluids are yours to look after, and only you can do it. And this selfishness is something that you see mirrored not just in the organic movement, but the weird connection between being in the organic movement and being anti-vax. Whereas, everyone in sub-Saharan Africa was rolling up their sleeves for grandma, right? You get the vax not because of you, but because you want to protect the people who are immunocompromised. You want to protect the kids. You want to protect the elders in your community. And so you get your vax. Nobody loves the pharmaceutical industry, but you do it anyway because people know what a pandemic looks like because they've lived through the HIV/AIDS pandemic. They've lived through a range of diseases in sub-Saharan Africa where, nobody loves the pharmaceutical industry, but people like dying of Ebola much less. People like dying of malaria much less. And so you engage, and people like dying of HIV/AIDS much less. You engage in certain kinds of prophylactic behavior for the sake of the community. And when they saw Americans fighting off medical care, which they couldn't get, for 2 years they couldn't get it, and we were fighting over it, they wanted to know what the hell was going on. And they were wondering why so many people who were part of this organic scene seemed to be so violently against caring for other people. And it sort of pulled the veil off this individualist culture that we have in the United States that seems so weird. And it was very strange to have these debates among our comrades here around public health and around how it is that one cares for a community, while understanding that there is white supremacy in the pharmaceutical industry, but also recognizing that actually there are ways that we put our bodies together and we take a risk in order to care for the ones that we love who are immunocompromised. So anyway, that story was one that sort of resonated weirdly in Malawi. But I'm saying this just because often in America we're told the only thing you can do is shop better or go vegan or ride a bike everywhere. Now these are cool things to do, but they are not in and of themselves sufficient. One ant just sort of holding a hand up waiting for the grasshopper there isn't any good. You have to be part of a movement to be able to make change. And I think that's the moment here where we have to both practice our ability to carry together. And America trains us to do that apart. America trains us, and capitalism trains us to be individualists, and breaks down our capacity to understand ourselves as part of a bigger movement. So this is not to say, everyone should just give up on being vegan. No, being vegan is a great way of reminding yourself every day that you have some agency despite capitalism's ability to try and deprive you of it. But that's insufficient. Capitalism also tells you that you can't do anything together because capitalism opposes unions. Capitalism opposes organizing. Capitalism opposes resistance. Capitalism opposes rebellion. But you can't rebel by yourself. Again, capitalism will say, sure, there's problems, but go see your therapist and then come back and everything will be fine. No, this isn't therapy. This is something we do collectively. And that is what the Ants and the Grasshopper is about. That's why it messes with this idea of individual versus collective. It's both. That was Anita's idea that sort of cropped up in our conversation. And when we ran it by her for the title of the film, that was the one that resonated the best.
Thank you for that and for explaining kind of how multivalent and ingrained that presumption of individual action as the starting point is for a lot of things, especially in our culture. I'm also going to put in the chat the link to the toolkit from the film that gives very concrete individual and collective actions that folks can do. And I'll pass it off to Shakira.
Thanks, Jessica. So we have a question about religion and spirituality and the role that it plays and how different groups of people may see or interact or understand climate change, given the presence of Christianity in the movie, as you mentioned, Anita being, very unapologetically invested or committed to her choice of religion. So how does all of that come together?
Well, Anita is one of the best kinds of organizers because she can find a common language with folk where, for instance, if I just sort of came in and started wagging my finger saying patriarchy is bad, or, did you know about climate change? I wouldn't have a leg to stand on, because I'd have flown there, and I'm also part of patriarchy. I fight it every day, and I'm also subject to it. That's not a great position from which to be able to sort of wag a finger. Plus, who responds to finger wagging? Nobody. Whose mind has ever been changed by a Twitter fight? Whose mind has ever been, who has ever persuaded someone just through brute force of argument? That's not how you win. What one does is through the kind of repeated engagement that Anita has, which is saying, look, I'm not even going to talk to you about climate change. I'm going to talk to you about the Bible. We're both on board with the idea that the Bible is important. Let's talk about what God wants of us, and let's have a theological discussion, and then let's enact that world now. That's what the recipe days are about. That's what great activism is. That's what D-Town Farms is doing, right? If you're showing God's community on earth, to use a religious language, or to show the possibility of prefigurative commune, like a commune happening right now, what you do is you make it happen. You live as if it's normal when you're in the bounds of that space, and you show people that actually beauty and joy can happen in a very transformed way. And you use what you have in common with other people to bring them in and to recruit and to gently wear them down, so that they realize that they live in the same village as you, and that they actually are happier and better off doing, abandoning patriarchy, recognizing the truth of climate change, than by carrying on in their previous sort of mode. But first, you have to hear people, and Anita is again one of the great organizers, because she's such a good listener. She can pick up on what it is, ways, with any activist conversation. You always have to be a good listener, because people are always, particularly people you're on the other side of an issue from you, they're always giving you cues about what's important to them. They're always giving you ways that you can love them. And look, I'm a militant communist who doesn't believe in God, but I also am ready to love people who I don't agree with, as a way of bringing them to an understanding that actually capitalism is the enemy, and that actually, white supremacy and patriarchy are real, and we need to, we need revolutionary transformation. But I can say that, but if I come to your door, knock on your door, and say, "Hello, I'm a revolutionary communist. I'm here to persuade you." That's not going to work at all. You have to come and you listen, and you hear where people are at, and you start asking questions, and you lead. And that's what Anita does, and that's why Christianity is so important, because other people believe in Christianity. She believes in Christianity, and she's able to use it as the common ground, because what common ground does she have with Trisha and Ed other than their faith? And yet that's the ground that she knows very well that she can be a ninja on, and she is. So, if we're thinking as organizers, then Anita has many lessons to offer us in terms of an animating set of ideas around bringing people who are not agreeing with us onto the same page. That's why Winston's transformation is so important. Here's an example of massive transformation where you would think, well, how do we end patriarchy in 4 or 5 years flat in this individual? But you look at him now, and he's right there. He's doing all the actions, the physical embodiment of all the things he said he would never do, and he's doing it. 5 years. What kind of magic is that, other than the kinds of organizing where where the use of the Bible, the use of faith, but also the use of regular interactions daily, sort of denormalizing patriarchy and instead normalizing gender equality. That kind of idea works much better than here's some data about how your household will be better off without patriarchy. So I think that's the lesson here, and that's why this film is circulating in a lot of faith-based spaces where certainly I would be very unwelcome, and where I would be useless as an advocate or a food system rabble rouser. There are lots of spaces in the center left and center right where this film's being screened, and it's being used to change people's ideas about international solidarity, about racism, and about patriarchy and about climate change. And we've got the data to show that actually people are coming over to Anita and Esther's vision. But you'll notice that when Anita and Esther ask for change, They don't say anything specific. What they ask for is be an advocate for climate change. I think that's quite important, right? That they are putting back onto us the duty and the work of interpreting, whatever shared faith we have or whatever shared relationship we have with one another and the earth, for us to do the work. And I think that's really important as well. They're not saying here in the Bible is where you have to reduce your carbon consumption to below 350 parts per million. What they're saying is here are some general principles that we agree on. Now go do that and make right with your God or with your life or with your principles, so that you are carrying this faith forward. I don't know if that's a satisfactory answer, Shakira, but I feel like, I'm so ill-equipped to talk about Christianity because it doesn't make sense to me.
That was a phenomenal answer. Your last part is hilarious. And this is why we say that cultural organizing is the only way to organize. And I think what you're describing, what we call cultural organizing, is like the creme de la creme to really get stuff done and to really push for transformation effectively on the ground. I'm going to pass it to Jessica to the next question. Thanks, Raj.
So I guess another form of organizing that students felt, at least this student felt a little disappointed by, was that scene where they're trying to meet with congressional representatives and no one's around. And I know that can be kind of par for the course, and the film, of course, ends with the Green New Deal, but they're wondering about any kind of updates on folks from Congress interactions, as well as grassroots, the groups mentioned in the film, any connections and how those have grown as well.
Oh, thank you. Yes. I mean, we were really frustrated. We went to the USDA, the USAID, all of these places asking for interviews. They wouldn't give us one. And then, in one very unfair Guardian review, we would, the review was that we included this Green New Deal thing just to make people feel good. It was a coincidence, and it's obvious that it's a coincidence. But this film actually is going to be screened on the Hill in Congress in a couple of months' time, because it's weird that it's happening under a Republican legislature rather than a Democratic one. But I think that's probably a good thing, because, again, this film can play not only to the communists, but also it works as a sort of gateway drug to organizing for people on the center right. And particularly given the sort of polarization of Congress at the moment, it's going to be interesting to see whether we can drag people on the center right over to just some basic dignity things before starting to organize for the revolution. So I'm sort of interested to see what happens on the Hill in a couple of months' time. But in terms of updates on the other organizations, of course, you know better than I do the good things that are happening in Detroit, and Shakira, you know better than I do what's happening with the Black Dirt Farm Collective. But in terms of the other organizations, really the big changes you saw are the ones in the film where Trisha and Ed have moved out of their Sustainable Iowa Land Trust to become farmers in Missouri, and also you see a sort of transformation where Jordan is now an organic chicken farmer who understands that climate change is real and is sorry for the way that he was before. I think those are the interesting kind of arcs of change that have happened in the meantime. And of course, COVID threw a wrench into everyone's world, but I think everyone's sort of getting back on the horse after that. So yeah, I'm sorry, Jessica, that I'm not able to offer much more in the way of updates, but I do think the congressional screening is sort of interesting. I'm excited about that.
Yeah, absolutely. You said in a few months, right?
Yeah, it'll happen by April, because that's when the appropriations start to happen. Right. So that would be the strategic moment to intervene and start persuading the centrists that they want to throw their lot in, not with the extremists, but with sort of more moderate Democrats.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So we have another question, and sort of this broaches what we've been talking about a bit in pieces, but I guess we need to address it more specifically around developing a gender analysis and how that can help with climate adaptation and mitigation, right? Which the film so masterfully does in various ways, right? Like Winston's transformation It's not what I expected to see at the end of the film, based on my experience with patriarchy and men, and generally speaking, right? So can you talk a little bit about, like, how do we connect those pieces around gender and climate?
Well, it's when we started making this film, which is 2010, it was weird that, well, it wasn't widely accepted that hunger is gendered, and that that seemed really weird. In the literature, there were maybe 2 articles that sort of mentioned that actually, when times are tough, women go hunger. Women experience hunger, and there's an increase in domestic violence. This was never something that was mentioned, but it was so obvious to folk on the ground organizing. And I think that obviousness was something that we wanted to communicate through the film, to show that there's the complexity of hunger. Right at the beginning, you hear Anita say hunger is a complex problem, and she talked about how you see the interaction there between alcohol consumption and domestic violence and food production, right? Where the drunk man comes home and wants this particular kind of food, and expects it, and expects the wife also to be looking after the kid and in the fields farming and all the rest of it. It was so abundantly obvious and clear there that was a concern. And then, of course, when rivers started drying up, that gendered analysis played out again, where Anita and Esther were saying, well, look, obviously, if there is patriarchy in the home and women are expected to breastfeed and to fetch firewood and all these other things, and now we have to wait even longer for the water, of course there's going to be an increased risk in domestic violence. Now, what is it that makes that obviousness in Malawi so difficult for us to see here? It is because in that regard, there is much more patriarchy in the United States than there is in the Soil, Food and Healthy Communities villages. So, I think that battle is that battle for the recognition of the intersection between climate change and patriarchy is also the simultaneous battle around the invisibility of often of race in discussions around climate change and discussions around capitalism and exploitation, because the way that climate change policy is so siloed here is, well, all we have to do is everyone gets a heat pump and everything's going to be fine, and that kind of, well, let's let the engineers loose on this and never bother listening to frontline communities, is precisely the kind of work that Jarl and Detroit are already pioneers in, be able to overturn that kind of thinking. So, I think it is the simultaneous analysis that really matters, and the analysis that recognizes race, that recognizes class, that recognizes gender, that recognizes heteronormativity, that recognizes the stolenness of this land. But all of that's possible to do and necessary to do simultaneously, because, again, if we're trying to fix hunger, then we have to fix all these other things. That was the story in Malawi, that they discovered themselves by becoming scientists. And I do maybe want to just spend a moment thinking about that, because often in movement spaces, we don't allow ourselves the luxury of recognizing that we are scientists. We may be activists, we may be musicians, we're carers, we're all these other things, but we never, you never necessarily hear us recognize in ourselves that we are scientists of change. And I think that's sad, because we give away ground that then gets taken by power, where then it's those scientists who have something to say about climate change, but not our scientists who have something to say about climate change. And so if we recognize that Anita and Esther are scientists of change, scientists, they're climate change scientists. They're looking at a certain, they're looking at the sociology of climate change, but they're also the agronomists of climate change. They're very interested in the corns, the beans, and the squash, the milpa system that you see at the beginning of the film. They're climate scientists, and they don't give up on that idea. They recognize that their process of discovery around confronting complex social problems begins with, the history of soil, food, and healthy communities was always about, first of all, women in the fields experimenting with crops and then sharing those ideas with other women. And then, and that was an idea that you noticed in the film, Shakira, was that actually it was women's knowledge about seeds that builds other kinds of scientific knowledge, and upon which a great deal of science rests. But that science doesn't have to be restricted to science about seeds. It's also science about how to end patriarchy. And there were so many experiments about how to end patriarchy. And the experiment that worked best was the scientific experiment of the recipe day plus one-on-one kind of feminist activism. But that's science. And I think that recognizing that we are scientists engaged in experiments of social change, searching for the interactions between patriarchy, but also class and also race, and also the history of bloody colonialism on this, on Turtle Island here, all of that matters. And so if we want to find out what's the connection between gender and climate change, first of all, I think we can recognize that we are experiments in post-capitalist survival of the climate crisis. And when we recognize that science is ours to claim and ours to become expert in, we get to recognize not just the gender component, but also these other components that simultaneously structure our experience of capitalism.
Yeah, thank you for that. It also, I kind of think highlights the rigor, right, of making what's invisible visible and the complexity of that, right? So not devaluing that, but embracing that rigor. So another question is about the connection between farmers in the US who are kind of leading the shift to sustainable agriculture or food sovereignty and farmers in Malawi, and how that has continued. Has there, since the production of the film, any increased coordination or knowledge between these two groups?
I wish. I mean, part of the tragedy was we finished the production in, so as I said, we finished our last sort of filming in February, March 2020. And then we came back and, the last thing we said, like, the last time I saw Anita in person, I'd be like, oh, I'm so excited. Look, this pandemic thing, it'll blow over. And we'll see you on the red carpet next year. And I haven't seen her since. And, the sort of international exchange has been really difficult. Initially because of the quarantine, and then visa restrictions, and then vaccination, the vaccine apartheid, which is still a real and ongoing thing, while our lawmakers here struggle to make us pretend that COVID is over. It's alive and well, and there are a lot of people who have yet to get the vaccines that have been paid for many times over and enriching these bastards and their their patent monopolies many times over. So it's still a struggle, but there, international movements like La Via Campesina still find ways of doing sort of regional exchanges around agroecological practices, and those are now getting back up to speed in southern and southeastern Africa. So in and around Malawi, there have been sort of local and regional exchanges where agroecological practices have been exchanged, but from US to Malawi, much less. I'm hoping at some point we get to actually have an event where Anita and Esther get to come back and we do more of these peer-to-peer kinds of exchanges. But unfortunately, all of that's been poleaxed by the pandemic. So those exchanges have been much less. I mean, the thing that has developed has been, as a result of the film, we've won a few awards and prizes, and we've sent those straight to Malawi, where they've been used to invest in an agroforestry project. Which involves getting new land and growing and planting new trees that help secure the water table and keep the water table up in areas very close to where Anita's home is. So while in the film she was saying, well, we try planting trees, there's never enough rain. There is an area just a little bit away from where she is where, now that we've got access to that land, they are starting to grow more and more trees, and that's reforesting in a way that's very supportive of the community, and that's part of our putting back into the ground some of the carbon that we took out of it in flying everywhere.
That's really great to hear. Wow. We have a second poll question that we want to get to before we depart. Could we pull that up? And I think it really hits on change, as we've been talking about. So this is a good time, right? According to Esther, what does change begin with? The children, Jesus, denial, theory, or practice? Raj, do you have any context for this as we wait for the results?
Yes, we screened the film at COP26 in Glasgow, and one of the interesting, I mean, the answer to this question was what it was that was the most useful, I think, and most productive contribution that we were able to make to the People's Summit at the Climate Change Summit in Glasgow last year, or year before last. But basically, yeah, the answer here is one that at some level pissed a few people off, but other people were like, oh yeah, I get it. And then we had a very productive debate about it. So should we see why? Yeah, we'll give people maybe just a second more. Is it the children, Jesus, denial, theory, or practice? Pick your answer, and then we can talk about why this was, why Esther came up with this answer, and how it might be useful for the organizing around food justice that we need to do. And the winner is, oh, interesting. So actually, what Esther said was change begins with denial. It's true that practice is a part of that. And in fact, that's a great answer because, look, the reason that Esther thinks change begins with denial is because Esther has seen three kinds of denial. She's seen AIDS denialism. So through the 1990s, there was denialism about what AIDS, HIV/AIDS was and how you got it and what it meant. And she's, as a nurse, worked through educating and sitting with people through their denialism and help them come out the other side. Then she's seeing denialism around patriarchy. And again, you see Winston emerge out of the other side of that. And she's seen denial around climate change. And she's seen folk come out at the end of that. But the reason people move through this is because of practice. So through organizing, people move through different stages. You may have seen sort of bumper sticker version of this ascribed to Gandhi, where first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. So denial is not at the ignoring you stage or even the laughing at you stage, it's at the fighting you stage. And because of your practice, because of your organizing, you've moved people from, no, they're not even paying attention, to that's a stupid idea, to that's a dangerous idea, to that idea is now normal. Here in Texas, for instance, it was, you could say just a few years ago, Texas was the state that fought for slavery twice, and people wouldn't even know what you were talking about. Then you could say people, maybe a few years back, Texas fought for slavery twice, and then there would be uncomfortable laughter because people would be like, oh yeah, okay, twice, because first of all, Texas was when white people came to what was then Mexico, and then they fought Mexico to be able to keep slavery, and then they fought on the wrong side of the Civil War to be able to keep slavery. So yeah, Texas fought for slavery twice. That's a very funny joke. Let's move on. Now, you're not allowed to tell primary school kids Texas fought for slavery twice. There's denial about this fact. And that's great, because that means that there's been progress from being ignored to being laughed at to being like, no, they are stopping us telling the truth about slavery in this state. And they are stopping us saying, well, even recognizing that the state is in the South. This is the state with the most Black people in America. And there's denial about the history of this state. And finally, we're going to make this, we're going to have this conversation about reparations. But before we get there, we have to organize. And the denial is a sign that our practice is paying off. But it's not a sign that we should then just leave it to denial, everything's going to be fine. It's a sign that we are on the road, but we must keep going. So that's why this discussion was useful when we were at COP, for instance, where change begins with denial. People are like, oh, we've got loads of climate denialism. How is that to do with change? And what we were saying was, no, it's not the denialism that's a good thing. Denialism is a symptom of movement organizing working. And that doesn't mean we give up. It means we double our efforts to be able to get to a normalized situation where everyone recognizes that climate change is not only real, but it has bases in racialized and gendered capitalism and a long history of colonialism in which the global South has suffered disproportionately because of what the global North has done. So that's the story behind change begins with denial. So if you meet people in denial, it means that at some level, someone else has done the work for you to get them to that stage, and now we have to bring them home.
I love that. Yeah, that's really inspiring. So there is a question sort of along the trajectory of change. Is there any insight on what Anita and Esther are doing today? I know you said that there hasn't been much contact because of the obvious, but any information?
I mean, I'm on WhatsApp with Anita, and it's funny. She doesn't have any electricity, or she has one solar panel now at her place, but she doesn't get signal. And yet, every time she goes into town, she's on WhatsApp like a Wall Street lawyer. Like she's all over it, and it's fantastic. So I'm in touch with her, and even though my Tumbuka is crap and her English isn't great, her English is way better than my Tumbuka, and so we sort of figure out how she's doing. She's great. There have been a couple of deaths in the community, but not because of COVID. It's just been the usual crap, ranging from just sort of old age to waterborne disease, to preventable illness that here we get antibiotics in time, and there they couldn't. So that I've been hearing that, but in general, people are doing fine, and Soils, Food and Healthy Communities are expanding their operations, and so I mean, it's life continues there. So it's I am in touch, and folk are getting on with the work.
So someone wants to know what you're doing to expand the reach of the film, sharing the documentary, and if there's plans for any follow-ups.
Thank you so much. I mean, we spent a lot of money. We were hustling to raise money to be able to get this film out into the world, particularly in the pandemic when all the screening plans we had just were blown out of the water. We want to have lots of people together and use it in lots of different circumstances, and that didn't really happen. So instead, what we've done is pivot into the places where we know that people are gathering now anyway, which is churches. So this film is screening in a lot of faith-based institutions. There's a free screening kit. There's like a Bible study. There's a range of things available for faith-based communities. And then we're also screening it, we're doing a lot of sort of campus screenings. We've screened it with comrades in the Shack Dwellers movement in South Africa. Abahlali Basemjondolo is a Shack Dwellers movement that I've been involved with for 20 years almost now. And they found it very useful in different ways, right? That they were less interested in the US and much more interested in the sort of patriarchy and in the agroecology elements of it. And so they took that from the film, but it's been used in by lots of different social movements in lots of different contexts. And as I say, it's sort of screening on Congress, but we've got two other developments. One, it's going to be pushed out onto things like Canopy, if you know what that is, or it'll be on the streaming platforms later on this year. It's not a Netflix film, obviously, but it is going to be on for sale on the usual kind of places. Also, WNET in New York are turning it into 5 to 8 minute short films to give away on YouTube, so those will be available as well. And as I say, the final sort of coda to this film really is a film called Reclamation that's currently in the final stages of production in Detroit, which is sort of a response to some of the things that were raised by Anita and Esther, but it's also a meditation in Detroit around climate change and around some of the dynamics that we talked about in the film, and I'm so excited to see that.
I am as well. Yeah, it's been a long time coming. I think there was a release of a draft of the film this past summer, and the community was really excited about it. We got a lot of great feedback, and I think there's been some hiccups because of the politics that's happening here on the ground. Right. But we're really anxious to see the final product. And thank you so much for investing in that and pushing for the autonomy of that. It's really making a huge difference. So we're going to wrap up with one more question. And I think we broached this a little bit, how Anita is spreading awareness about climate change. And we would love to end on how we can help her, and what are your specific suggestions on what we can do in our everyday life right here, right now, in the most radical way to push forward the agenda.
organize, comrades. That's always the answer, isn't it? Because, you know, I mean, I think the idea of being food literate for everybody, right, is really powerful. And it's, I mentioned this, I think, to Lily at the beginning when we were sort of in the green room, but it's such an honor to be part of this class, to be part of this sort of community of food scientists, of scientists of justice, with y'all. And, you know, I'm honored to be able to contribute to the sort of peer reviewing of the knowledge that comes out of this process. But this knowledge, it doesn't just hang in the air. It's always needs to be turned into praxis. And that Marxist word is a really important one, right? It's about putting the theory to work. And we see this theory around around race, around patriarchy, around capitalism. But it's another thing to sort of embody it, and we'll always embody it imperfectly. You know, I mean, that's the imperfection is fine. You know, as long as it's a work in progress that we're committed to as part of a community of comrades to recognize, you know, in the same way that I will always be recognizing and working on the patriarchy in me, right? That's never going to stop. There's never a sort of, and then patriarchy ended for Patel. No, that's every day for the rest of my life. That's the work, but that's the work, you know, because otherwise we slip back. And that is, yeah, I think that's one of one of the things about the moment we find ourselves in is that there's like snap judgments rather than recognizing that we're all in some ways just on this journey together. And we need to condemn patriarchy wherever we see it, including in ourselves. We need to condemn white supremacy wherever we see it. We need to condemn state violence. We need to condemn colonialism. And we need to figure out how it is that we mobilize comrades who are on the journey in ways that are not tolerant of any kind of, you know, deviation, but are also recognizing that actually, you know, we need to organize together to make radical transformation. And I think that finding those communities of people ready to forgive one another in error, as long as it's good faith, there's not, you know, people being fucked up. There's no space for that in the movement, but there is space for people making mistakes. I think that in our movement, we all do it, and figuring out how we don't do the Twitter thing, but do the comrade thing where we sit down, we break bread, and we heal. That is a really important thing that I guess I've learned that from Anita and Esther, because, you know, you didn't see all the fights we had along the road, because we had fights. We were, you know, we're cooped up with each other for weeks and weeks, and the growing process where we came to understand each other's rhythms, and we got to understand each other's kind of, this is your philosophy of change, and I can, you know, not mine, but I can see how we're both lifting this grasshopper together. That moment was really kind of, you know, those moments were really liberating. So you know, together, yes, there are going to be fights. There are always going to be fights. That's fine. That's good. There's always going to be disagreement. There's always going to be sort of comradely discussion, but we all have to lift the grasshopper. And I think that recognition that we, you know, we're on the, you know, we may not be on the same page, we're in the same book at least, is how it is that we're going to move forward together. So, you know, let's do these individual actions that we need to do, but let's lift the grasshopper together.
Thank you. Thank you. Raj, you're so amazing. And we're so grateful for this discussion. So thank you all for joining us.
Thank you for joining us. I hope we're all fired up in different ways. I just want to give a few quick course announcements. Remember, your harmonized participation is up. Also, under course resources in the syllabus, you have some guidelines for teamwork resources, a guideline and a contract. I think it's a good place to start as you begin to communicate and meet with your teams. Remember to always check in on our extra credit opportunities in the syllabus. Those are always changing. We're always adding new things. And please be sure to read through your syllabus and expect an email from our GSIs in the coming days as well. Lily, did you want to take over?
Yeah, I just wanted to say our speaker next week is going to be awesome. Next Tuesday, same place, same time. Fawzia Ismail is going to be joining us for her talk about food culture as companion. So you can, if you get our SFSI newsletter, you'll get a description in that. Otherwise, Canvas students, you can find her work online, check out her website ahead of time. And I think that's all that I've got. Who else? Anything else to wrap up? All right. I think we got it.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. DJC if it's easy to hit the tunes, go for it. Otherwise, we'll see you all next week.
Peace.